Jump scare. All right.
Oh, and also that be careful what they talk about because everyone can hear us. Well, I'm muted right now. So let me know what's going on so I can move
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie LeVar, and I'm a senior pre-law student here at Cedar Crest College. I'm also one of the library ambassadors. Today, through collaboration between the Cressman Library and our Center for Diversity and Inclusion, we are welcoming faculty from Lehigh University's Institute for Indigenous Studies. As someone who is Navajo, this event is an opportunity for people to get an insight of how life may be for us. Natives have been called the invisible minority. We are constantly being forgotten about, all while being discriminated against. I have noticed in my time at Cedar Crest College that there has never been a single Indigenous-focused event, and I wanted to change that. Previously, Native American Heritage Month has not been mentioned by this school. I'm excited, humbled, and grateful for the opportunity to host this event so others can see, learn, and reflect on what Indigenous culture can mean. I have only had one professor do a land acknowledgement in any of my classes. Are any of you actually aware of what land this college is on? Cedar Crest College is located in eastern Pennsylvania on the ancestral land of the Lenape Delaware tribe. We must also acknowledge the neighboring Indigenous tribes who are connected to this land. The Shawnee to the west, the Susquehannock to the south, and the Erie, Iroquois, and Muncie Delaware to the north. This is important to me because natives have paved the way for many parts of our lives, and so much of what we see as American culture, such as lacrosse, fashion, such as beaded designs or feathers, is from natives. At your seats, you may have seen a handout, and in that handout there are various recipes from different tribes and other notable resources, including a QR code for a live guide, which will take you to the library website, and it has a bunch of other Indigenous resources. It is my honor to welcome our speakers today, who have all worked closely within the Indigenous communities. Our focus today is on Native health, spirituality, and religion, all of which intersect in the communities. Hello. So I think the first question that many people might be wondering is just what made you choose to study Native health and why have you found that it is so important?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Chris Daley. I'm from the Lehigh University College of Health in the Department of Community and Population Health, which is a really weird name, but it's because it's the only department in our college right now, and we didn't know what to call it. So, I am an applied medical anthropologist by training, which if you have no idea what that means, it means I live at the intersection of medicine and culture. So that's kind of been the focus of my work, and I've been working with Native communities for about 25 years, focused on a variety of different health-related issues and traditional healing and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Yatte, Shiye, Sean Daly, and Miche. Shiye, Italian Day, Donne, do Irish Day, Donne. What I said was, hello, my name is Sean Daly. I am of Irish and Italian ancestry, or actually Italian-Irish ancestry in Navajo. In Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you give your name as well as your clan. But since I'm not Navajo, I don't have a clan, so what we Bilagana or white people do is we introduce our ethnicity. So that's a common practice out on the Navajo res in that community. I am Chris's husband, and I too have been working with natives for about 25 years. I am an ethnographer, which is a type of cultural anthropologist who really focuses on cultural traditions. My background is primarily at that intersection of health and religion, because we'll talk a little bit about it today. But in Indigenous communities, health and religion are not separable. They are the same thing. So.
Hello, I'm John Pacheco, and I am Quechua from my dad's side, and from Bolivia, and Cherokee from Oklahoma on my mom's side. And I've been working with Sean and Chris for over 10 years, and I'm also in the College of Health at Lehigh. My training is, I got my PhD in health policy and management, but I have a big background in environmental health and also biological sciences.
Why did you choose to study Native health, and why have you found that it's important?
I did not choose to study Native health. I know, I'm serious. It was not my intent. I kind of stumbled into it. In full disclosure, I was born and raised in Central Jersey. Never met an Indigenous person until I got to college. And it was something I honestly stumbled into because of an amazing professor I had back at Rutgers University in Jersey. Shortly after taking class with him, I found myself, actually we found ourselves, me and Chris out in Arizona, starting to work with Native people. And yeah, that's kind of how it happened. It was not a plan. It was just something I stumbled into. It resonated with me, and so I decided to follow that path, and it kind of worked out pretty well.
Yeah, similar story. I was pre-med. Then I decided I actually wanted to help more people than one patient at a time. And no, it's not because I didn't get into medical school. That's what everyone says. I actually chose not to become an MD, and then worked at a school of medicine for 16 years and really solidified why I was not an MD. But yeah, so I was a pre-med and was always interested in health. And so as an undergrad, I started looking at plants, specifically native plants. It was because of this fantastic professor we had who got us sparked this interest in native peoples. And so I started looking at Navajo medicinal plants and the chemical constituents in them, and I started doing all kinds of weird chemical analyses and things, which was fun. But as I started working with people learning that, I started learning about health disparities and the types of health disparities that are faced by Native people in this country, and actually not just this country. If you look at Indigenous people around the world, they suffer from some of the worst health disparities out there. And so with my interest in health, starting to look at that, I said, well, this is where I have to be. Because if you want to affect change, if you want to actually make a difference in people's lives, one patient at a time doesn't do it. And so working at the community level and working with people who suffer some of the worst disparities makes sense to me.
Yeah, so kind of the same, or along the same lines, where I didn't really go into my education thinking I was going to work in Native health. So my aunt and my grandma, they both had breast cancer, and that was just something that was like always there. I remember like the last time I went to Bolivia to go visit my aunt, I wasn't like she didn't want to even see her, but she did not look like herself. And so the last time I didn't get to see my aunt, and she passed the next year, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after undergrad. So my uncle told me, I thought I was going to be pre-med too, and go the medical route, but I wasn't quite sure I wanted to sit and take the test. I did the PCAT, I did all right for pharmacy, but then I didn't want to have to do pills all day either. I guess I should have done something to see if I would have liked that. But my uncle said, go for your a master's in public health and see if you like that. And people like public health, masters of public health, to go into being an MD if that was your route. But as a lot of people you might get to know, they do the same lines. They kind of go to public health and they stay that route because you can really make a giant change in the population instead of just working individually. And so along those lines, I found out that Chris had an opening for a Susan G. Komen scholar, which meant a lot to me because of my aunt and grandma. And I was able to do my research around that for my MPH to kind of look at the male side of breast cancer. And then at KU Med, they were also having, after I got my MK, sorry, I'm kind of all over the place, but they had a program for your policy management, and I was continuing to be able to work with Chris and in Native populations and learn so much about different disparities, not only in my tribes, and more in the North American side, but also like what impacts a lot of Native tribes in North America, and how there's a lot of similarities and issues that come down with when you look at South American tribes also.
Just so you know, the online community asks that you have the mic closer to your mouth because they can't hear you.
I can talk louder.
How have your own personal values, if any, either changed with the research that you've done, or have they aligned with the research you've done?
Can you read?
Yes.
Oh my goodness,
How have your own personal values changed since you've started your work, or how have you found that they have aligned with the work that you've been doing?
Well, that's a great question. So when you think about personal values, I think personal values change the more experience you get in life, the more education you get, the way you view things change more as you learn more, right? So I want to say my personal values have changed a lot. The way I view communities has changed a lot. You learn about your own family, like core at first, right? So you have your own family core, and then you start learning about other communities. They have different family cores or different beliefs, and when it comes to like culture and stuff, you really don't know the difference until you're out of your culture into another culture. So I want to say that they have changed a lot. My personal, what was the second part of that?
How do your own personal values align with the research?
Yeah, so like I think if your personal values don't align with the research, you won't be happy, right? So I went to this talk and they quoted Mark Twain saying, if you find something that you love, and someone will pay you wages, right? So like your personal values kind of guide what you do in your research and everything. And so I think they're parallel with each other. And learning about that as you grow in your education, as you grow, like not just in like formal education, but just education from these experiences that you guys attending here. You're growing in a different way, and you're going to learn something different that might change the way you look at something or change your own values. And then you go and see a problem that, okay, I'm very passionate about X problem, and now I can potentially go out and help that community with it. But now it's not like trying to spin it from like, we don't want to say this community has a problem, but we want to look at the strengths of that community and build up those strengths so that way that community can address the problem without saying that you have a problem, if that makes sense. And that's, I think, kind of the route that my personal value wants to go into a community or my education leading, instead of saying, okay, we can go look at all these statistics and say, okay, we're high in obesity here, we're high in smoking here. You have all these problems, like, oh geez, like what are we gonna do about them? Instead of like, let's look at all these strengths that we can help address obesity, we can help address tobacco, and that's through my training that I'm very beneficial that I've learned through Chris and Sean and through my different programs that I've attended.
It's kind of a hard question in some respects. I think the one thing that's changed a lot over the years for me is learning to think more and more holistically. Growing up in New Jersey, things were very black and white, yes, no, right, wrong. And as I spent time in more and more Indigenous communities, things were not as simple, not as cut and dry. And I think over the years, this idea of just thinking, looking for the connections, understanding where those connections are, definitely changes you as a person, changes you as a researcher. And like Joe kind of said, the two do go hand in hand. And as you start to think differently, start to understand things aren't as simple, you also start to build a little bit more empathy. And this is not just research. These are people, these are communities. And the research kind of, while it's important, starts to become secondary to working with the community, being a part of that community. So again, for me personally, again, it was a lot about learning to think more holistically, looking for these connections, and starting to understand particularly that, what you're taught in high school, what you're taught in college, no offense to anyone out there, if the people teaching you haven't necessarily spent time with these communities, they don't know these communities. Just because you got it from a book or documentary doesn't mean there's a true understanding and reciprocal sharing of knowledge and understanding there. So yeah, I think that's about the best way I can answer the question.
Ditto. I think, I agree with everything they've said. I think for me, the thing that changed was how I looked at myself and my own upbringing. So I also grew up in Jersey. I'm a Sicilian from Jersey. You can make of that whatever you want. There's lots of great stereotypes. And so I spent most of my early adult life running from those stereotypes, straightening and dyeing my hair, making sure I didn't look Sicilian in some way, making sure I didn't use any of those bad Italian words that were just in my vocabulary, changing my accent. I used to have a really strong Jersey accent. Because I wanted to get away from that. I didn't want to acknowledge that I was part of that Jersey Shore or Sopranos culture, because I was not. And working with Native communities made me see, as I worked in the community, people who had so much pride in who they were and how they grew up. It made me sort of rethink who I was and how I grew up and how I was running away from a really rich culture that is not all The Sopranos, which is a good show, but that's beside the point. It made me really rethink who I was and appreciate what I learned when I was a kid and kind of get back into some of that.
What area or areas of research do you think need to be either studied more? I know there's probably really everything, or talked about more? Because me personally, I know a lot about the disparities in specifically diabetes and specifically breast cancer. But and tobacco is a huge one. But are there any others that you think might be known less or that need to be just talked about so much more?
Yeah, everything. I'm a tobacco researcher, so yes, tobacco, of course. Actually, the one that sticks out, there's a couple that stick out in my mind, but they're all in sort of the mental health realm. Suicide among Native kids is between 8 and 11 times the rate in other populations, particularly for Native young girls. And all of that is tied into some terrible things that happen in the home environment, a lot of molestation due to things like alcohol and drug use. Native kids went to foster care at ridiculous amounts because of that. So to me, kind of kids and the mental health issues that are surrounding them, I feel like it's a silent epidemic that more people need to know about. There's also her shirt.
Yes. Yeah. It says no more Soul and Sisters if you can't read it.
You can talk about it.
Yeah. I would say 2 areas. One is actually U.S. federal law. One of the things people don't realize is even today, life in Indian communities, particularly in reservations, is so mandated and dictated by federal law that you cannot work in the communities without having some baseline understanding of U.S. federal law. It is again ridiculous how much today no other racial, ethnic, political group in the United States, arguably the world, is tied to as many federal laws as Indigenous people in the United States. The second thing I would say is the MMIW, and this is something that has only recently gained attention in the United States. To be honest with you, it really started to break mainstream back in 2017 when a movie called Wind River came out with Jeremy Renner. It started to leak a little bit out into pop culture and mainstream American culture, but this has been an issue since the 1880s. There's certain groups of female that have been sexualized and fetishized by mainstream American culture, and American Indian women are one of those groups. And what we see in a lot of areas in the United States is that American women, Indian women, are seen as expendable resources. You take them, you use them, you discard them. And there's certain parts of the United States where American Indian women go missing at 10 times the rate of other women of other ethnic groups. And people here in Pennsylvania think it's an issue in Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, and it's not. It's an issue here because we live in a part of the country where people drive through on major highways to go to New York, to go to Boston, to go to Philly. And a lot of these missing women are forced into sex trafficking and come through this area. So this is not a Western US issue. This is an issue all across the United States. And again, it is an incredible problem that receives very little attention. And to be honest with you, it's even worse up in Canada. The number of women going missing in Canada is astronomical. And a colleague of mine works down in Mexico and said they're having the same issue down there with Indigenous women. They just go missing left and right, and it's not reported. Law enforcement very rarely acts. So yeah, it's a significant problem.
Yeah, so that's a question that you can ask everybody and we get all a different answer. And like you said, they're all important. I've been working with tobacco research also for the last 10 years, and so tobacco is very important to me too, but I'm also very interested in environmental impacts. And if you look at pretty much all different type of health outcomes in the majority populations, they're bad, right? And then you look at indigenous populations, almost all health outcomes are worse. And it gets even worse the more rural some of these communities are. And the same in South America, where and here in Costa Rica, like for the tires and stuff, there's the native lands are seen as expendable. It could be seen as dumping grounds, or we can go ahead and use like these harsh chemicals in this area because of the population is small and who cares about them really because they're not a majority. And so that's a big issue. I think that needs to be researched too. Is like how can we change how people are impacted from these different environmental issues that we create ourselves, right? So we create these environmental issues, like we have all these tires, we have nuclear waste, like what are we going to do with this? We have all this trash, where are we going to dump it? And not treating a population that is already hurting in all aspects of health and making it even worse by exposing them to these environmental risks that they have.
What can students or those of us who might not necessarily go into a healthcare field do to help with inequities? Like what have you found, like simple things or, things that we should focus on more as students?
Honestly, I think one of the simplest things that can be done is the acknowledgement that Native people are still here. It's one of those things in the United States people forget, and when they do remember, it's like, oh yeah, you guys wear buckskin lip and teepees on my horses. It's like, yeah, and white people wore wool pants and buckle boots at one time. Native people are still very much alive and around and flourishing. And I think in order to get to the point where a lot of movement can be done to rectify some of these issues, there has to be acknowledgement that Native people are still here and they're not stuck in a particular point in time, and that like all cultures, it's dynamic and changes, and recognize who Native people are today. I mean, and maybe that makes sense in my mind, and I do tell my students that all the time. You can't jump 20 hurdles ahead until we start bringing the attention to people that Native people are here, they have problems, we all have problems. And like Joe said, there are positive things in Native communities that we can focus on and start there. Start having dialogues with Native people. Again, this paternalistic model of learning about Native people and going to them and saying, this is what can be done to help you, doesn't work. That dialogue of, be honest, I didn't know you guys were still around here. What's your problems? How can we work together? So this acknowledgement that they're still here and engaging them, even as students in undergrad classes with projects and things like that, to me, that's a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, kind of along those same lines, go to a powwow. go to a Native focused event. These are open to the public. A lot of people have a misunderstanding that, you know, all Native events are sacred ceremonies. Okay, some are, but powwows are social events. They're fun. There's really good food, good dancing, good singing, you know. Go experience Native culture. Introduce yourself to Native people. Talk to people. You know, a lot of Native people feel isolated because all of their cultural events are just them. And other people don't come in. And people say they don't because they feel uncomfortable. Get out of your comfort zone. That's the best advice I can give you for anything, by the way. Just get out of your comfort zone. Go do something that makes you totally uncomfortable. Experience life with other people who are different from you. And there's ways to do that, you know. I mean, you can start online. You know, there's Native-owned businesses online where you can get some beautiful jewelry. Check it out. You don't have to buy it. Just take a look at it. And then start interacting with people, even if it's online. And please, 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 don't be sexy Pocahontas for Halloween. Pocahontas was how old? Like 8 or 9. If you think an 8 or 9-year-old girl is sexy, we're gonna go back to my mental health talk. Don't do that.
Yeah, so along those same lines, and I think what you're doing here is a good start as bringing students, and you guys attending is huge, right? So that, like, as students, and what can other people do is really awareness. So if we look at, well, does anyone not know what a pink ribbon means? Right, so a pink ribbon, we want to, okay, Susan G. Komen, and a pink ribbon. If I put those two together, everyone knows what that means, right? And so that is something that was really started at a grassroots. So awareness has been brought to breast cancer from Susan G. Komen and a pink ribbon. And that's really what I think needs to happen from the student perspective, like you're doing here. You bring awareness and let, you know, we're still here. This is still an issue. These people need help. And you guys coming and attending, bring a friend next time, or having those events, or even going and looking at what local powwows are and encouraging people to go and attending those events. I really think that's what students can do to help bring awareness, or to bring, just acknowledge. And it's something that's kind of, you know, using Susan G. Komen as a model there, because that is something that everyone knows. Like when we see pink and we see the ribbon in Susan G. Komen, that there's awareness. But now, you know, like going off the rails here a little bit, but you know, the issue is that now we have awareness. Now what are we going to do in action? So I think we're still at the point where we need more awareness, and then hopefully we can figure out what we can do with action. So Susan G. Komen's having to do the same thing. Okay, now everyone knows, but now what can we do to improve an issue? So that's kind of my view.
So I know that you have mentioned working closely with Navajo tribes. And one question a few students and faculty members would like to know are, what key differences have you found between non-natives and natives, and more specifically within different tribes? So it can be cultural, it can just anything, any differences that you found that might have shocked you, or something that you appreciated?
One of the, wow, this is a brutal question. There are 574 federally recognized Indian nations in the United States right now. There are approximately 200 state recognized tribes, and a little over 300 non-recognized tribal communities. So we're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of communities across the United States alone. You throw Canada and Mexico into the mix, it gets even higher in numbers. The differences between tribal communities are vast. It's no different than going to Europe and Slovakia does one thing, Scotland does something else, Ireland does this, Hungary does that. So within Native communities, there's a vast array of beliefs, practices, traditions, so forth. So I bring that up because one of the things we run into a lot is people thinking Indigenous people have a lot of similarities, and the reality is they really don't. So to back up to your original questions, differences between Native people and non-natives. One of the things that struck me early on when I started to work is that in the United States, we come from a society where it's very patrilineal. Things go through the father's line, the names, property, stuff like that. Native America is about 50-50. Some tribes are patrilineal, some are matrilineal. Navajos, matrilineal. Name, that's through the mother's line. Clan affiliation, first clan, mom's side. Who owns the house, who owns the livestock? Traditionally, it was the women's family. So definitely what we would consider gender dynamics can be a difference. Along those lines, one of the things a lot of tribes are very, very, very accepting of, for lack of a better term, third and fourth genders. Navajos, to go back to that. Their creation story references a third gender, Nadali, biological men who lived as women. And it's in their origin story. So, you know, we in the United States, we're dealing with a lot of new gender issues that are tens of thousands of years old in certain Native communities. Just the acceptance of that view on gender and just the idea of, oh, that's who you are, great, go live your life, have your life. And again, that struck me pretty early, and I can go on, but I won't. Yeah, I'll throw one more in there. Time. Indian time, very different. Meeting starts at 6 o'clock. Maybe you say it starts at 6. We'll start at 6:30 when everyone's there. Class starts at 2 o'clock. No, everyone didn't get there till 10 after 2. It's not starting. Very, very abstract and amorphous Indian time. Not nearly as rigid. Oh, yes, you do.
I guess one thing that struck me is the exact opposite, that there are a lot of similarities among all people. You know, the importance of family, that is certainly not Native specific, but yet is hugely important in virtually every Native culture, but it is in many, many other cultures too. And along the lines of family, the importance between the bond between, you know, parents and children specifically, and also the extended family. And these are not Native specific, but you see these sort of similarities, and also core values that are really just very similar. You know, the importance of being nice to the people around you. You know, okay, not everybody is all the time, but if you look cross-culturally, that is a value. The importance of resilience. You know, getting through tough times and things like that. These are not specific to Native people. They tend to be more specific to people who have experienced more hardship in their lives and communities that have been discriminated against. But you do see those similarities, even though people will say, no, we're very different, we're very different. But those similarities are there, and sometimes that can bring people to the table with each other. What struck me as very different, and this is very much from a health perspective, coming into Native communities, in Western medicine or allopathic medicine, we have physical health. We might talk about mental health. We're not great at it, but it's there, sort of. You know, we'll give you a couple counseling sessions with your insurance, it's fine. No more than 3. Because we can fix anything in 3 sessions with a counselor. But when you go into Native communities, it's not just about physical health. It's not just about mental health. It's also about spiritual health, and it's about cultural health, and it's about all of these other things. And when you treat someone, you can't treat them just their physical health. You have to treat the other things as well. And so to me, that's a huge difference, and it's one that's really difficult to deal with when you're bringing physicians into a community. And that's a lot of what I've done over the years. You bring physicians in, and they want to treat not just the physical health. They say things like, well, I'm a nephrologist, so let's talk about your kidneys. Okay, but my kidneys are like this because of my diabetes. Okay, but you got to go to an endocrinologist for that stuff. That's hormones, I can't do it. Well, but it all goes together. And so we compartmentalize everything in health, and Native people do not. On the whole, even though the vastly different cultures that are out there, they don't do that, and they treat all of it together and think of all of it together, and it makes so much sense, right? Like, let's say you have terminal cancer. Don't tell me that you're not having some mental health issues with that. don't tell me that there's nothing going on socially with your family over things like that. You know, so the idea of understanding illness from a holistic perspective and treating illness from a holistic perspective.
That kind of goes into the next question, so that's perfect. In your experiences or your research, what are some, this is kind of an open-ended question, but I'm gonna try and make it not. What examples of intersections between health and spirituality have you seen specifically in, I know, yeah. Because like y'all said in your opening, it is kind of the same. It does very much go hand in hand. But I was wondering if there are any examples that you have came across or that you could think of that have stuck out to you.
I'll give you I'll call it a case study. A gentleman who actually is a very famous AIM activist by the name of Russell Means. He had laryngeal cancer, okay, so throat cancer, due to a lot of years of smoking and chewing tobacco, a variety of things. And it was pretty advanced stage. And he went and he saw a medical doctor. He also saw a traditional healer. And he came and he told us, you know, we'd been working with him, and he said, you know, I'm healed. And we said, really? Like, I mean, you're at stage 4. Like, this is amazing. And he's like, I'm healed. I'm going to die in a few months. Huh? Because in his mind, he was healed spiritually. He was okay to die. He was ready to end. He was able to say goodbye to his family. He was ready to move on to the next world. Physically, no, the cancer was still there. You know, it wasn't going anywhere. But to him, it was about that spiritual healing. And so, you know, for him, that all just clicked and just made sense. That's kind of the best example I can come up with.
I'll do a case study story too then. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to spend some time and work with a guy named Samuel Sandoval. He is one of the original Navajo code talkers from World War II. If you're not familiar with the code talkers, they're the ones who encoded the Navajo language and passed messages in the South Pacific during World War II. He's from Shiprock, New Mexico, and he was telling a story about how he went and fought in the South Pacific and saw quite a bit of action. And when he got home after the war, he was perfectly fine. But shortly after getting back home, he couldn't walk. He woke up one morning, he couldn't walk. And his family took him to a physician. The physician tested him and said, "You're fine." And he's like, "I can't walk." And this went on for some time. And his father was like, "We need to take you to see a singer," which is a traditional Navajo healer. And what happened was, in Navajo tradition, you're not supposed to touch dead bodies. Major no-no. At one point during a campaign in the Pacific, he had to crawl over several dead bodies so he didn't get shot. And they had to do a 9-night ceremony for him because he had an illness that we wouldn't recognize as illness in mainstream American culture, but it was essentially a form of what we would call a ghost sickness. He touched a dead body, it contaminated him spiritually, and so they had to do a 9-night ceremony for him, which didn't involve any medical intervention from white standards or Western medicine. It involved a lot of prayer, singing, and time with his family, and at the end of it, he got up and walked away. And it was this idea of, again, to go back, it was a traditional way of healing, taking into an account something that was part of his culture, and brought in that spirituality, brought in that belief in the spirit world, because in his mind, it was spirits that intervened, removed that ghost sickness, and helped him go back to a functioning normal life.
I'll continue with the case studies. So there's a story in Bolivia, in Quechua people that you don't let a baby cry underneath the moya tree. The moya tree, I think it's kind of more like a crabapple tree. It's the one with the little red berries on there. And so this family, I think they're like my third cousins, they went out to a nice little picnic and they were underneath the moya tree and they just had a baby. What do babies do? They cry. So they go home, the baby doesn't stop crying, right? So what we would call a fussy baby here is a colicky baby. And they could not get the baby to stop crying. Everything they did not soothe the baby. So they went to a curandero, which is a traditional healer. And they told them what you need to do is cut down the tree and throw it in the river. They cut down the tree, they throw it in the river, the baby wasn't crying anymore. It had slept through the night, it wasn't colicky anymore. So that, and then there's other beliefs that when you get an infection or something happens to you, it's not maybe someone put a curse on you. So you need to go to your traditional healer and figure out why this swelling or something is occurring. And so they try to treat it as someone also cursed you or put a hex or something on you along that lines. So my dad broke his hand really, really bad and he had to get pins and they could not get the swelling to stop. Even though elevating, it just kept continuing to the point where they thought they might have to figure out how to drain his hand. And so when he was in Bolivia, he went to his healer and they said, oh, you need just to cut this cactus. I don't know the name of the cactus, but it's the short little round ones that grow on the ground. You slice it really thin, you put it over the wound, and it will suck the infection out, and then you just burn it. And so he did that, and the swelling went down the next day, and he thought, oh, okay, this is because it oxidizes, like you cut an apple and it turns brown. Same reason, but no, he had it and put it on his other hand that was normal, did not change color, it stayed white. And then when he was little, he cut his finger really bad that it got a weird infection. And the name, it's an herb, but it doesn't have a name in English. The name is in Quechua, it starts with you say it twice. It's going to come back to me. But there's the same thing where it's a very fibrous leaf. You boil it, you wrap it around your finger or your wound, and it kind of forms a cast as it dries. And then wherever the infection was, like so if I cut this finger, wrap this thing all around my hand, I'm only going to see yellow turn happen at where the infection site is. And my dad remembers that happening to him a lot, where they'll dry out like something that someone put a curse on them or a hex. And they're very, in my dad's culture, and they're very superstitious people. Like till this day, my dad will never cross the path of a black cat. They will drive a mile around the block or wherever it is to go a different direction home if he thinks that he saw a cat that was fully black cross his path, that he won't do that. And that's a lot of people in indigenous tribes have those kind of superstitions and different beliefs. Where here in the Western medicine, we think we can address, but there's something you can't address with traditional belief. And people have been living such a long time in these different areas without modern medicine, and so you have to believe that something that they're doing is true. So those are, I guess, three key steps.
I would like to talk about more specifically the research y'all have done, more specifically your breast cancer research. So my mother recently got the MF at her name, she do mammographies now. So she's very excited to hear that I was going to be in the presence of someone who has researched breast cancer. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the disparity between mammography and breast cancer between natives and non-native women.
Yeah, sure. So most of my research in the breast cancer area has been looking at barriers to getting mammography done. If you look at native versus non-native women, native women on the surface look like they're doing pretty well. Their incidence rates, or how many people get breast cancer, are actually lower than for a lot of other populations. So that looks fantastic. Then you look at mortality, and mortality looks really different. So native women, once they are diagnosed with breast cancer, are way more likely to die from it. And a lot of that has to do with very late stage at diagnosis, which has to do with, are you getting mammograms? Or are you going to a doctor regularly, frankly? Because it's not just about the mammogram itself, it's also, are you seeing a doctor regularly? So that goes into access to care kinds of issues. So a lot of the things that I've looked at have been surrounding access to mammograms. And so one of the things what's a huge issue is when you live in these rural reservation communities, getting a mammogram is not simply, oh, well, it's gonna take me a while to get an appointment, but it's 15 minutes away. It's, I gotta go 3 hours, and, I still have to wait the 8 months for the appointment, and so that's a problem. The intervention we kind of came up with for that, and this was out in Arizona, it was a mobile mammogram unit that would drive around, and we did mammograms and pap smears in the same unit, which was kind of cool, being able to address multiple issues. But it wasn't just the access issues, there was also a lot of fear surrounding it. And so when people said, and this is why qualitative research is wonderful, by the way, when people said that they had fear about it, everyone assumed that the fear was simply, I don't want cancer. It went much deeper than that. It was not, I don't want cancer. It was, there's no way I'm gonna get treatment for this, which is a very different kind of fear. And because I can't get treatment, what's gonna happen if my family knows I'm sick and I'm not getting treated? What's gonna happen to my family? And I'm not gonna be there for my kids. And so it went much, much deeper, that fear. There was also a fear of the test itself. Not just the, well, it might be painful, it's a big squish. It wasn't just the fear of the test, it was the fear of going into that medical facility. And how are people gonna treat me? And do these people know my breasts? Because they don't look the same as yours. And so there was a lot of fear about who was gonna be performing the mammogram. Was it going to be someone who was going to be respectful, to their belief systems? And, it's not okay for me as a woman to undress quite the same way that you white women do that. And I certainly don't want any men around, anywhere involved in this process. And so there was fear about that and just the going in to get a mammogram. And so, part of the way to solve that, of course, is to get Native women trained to do mammograms. And that, that's always a big focus. But the barriers were so multi-layered that we really started trying to understand that better and started trying to, figure out ways to address all of these different things, which of course are in some sense unaddressable because there's so many of them and they're all so tied to other things. But yeah, so that was a huge portion of the breast cancer work that I did. The other piece of a lot of the funding that I've had for breast cancer, which I'm actually more proud of, came out of this research, and that's I got a few educational grants from Susan G. Komen, and it allowed me to pay for public health training for 8 different Native people, which Joe was one. And it was really exciting to me to do that because that meant that these were people who could go back to their communities and do things. And so to me, I was trying to address some of those things that we were learning by making sure we were training Native people. Do you want to talk about your breast cancer?
Yeah, so a part of that again. So we have awareness, right? So it's kind of talked about Susan G. Komen, pink ribbon. Everyone knows what that means. And there's also a thing that a lot of people don't realize is that men have breasts too, and bringing awareness to that also, because what happens if a man gets breast cancer? There's a lot of stigma behind it. There's also, that you notice something, a lump or something in your chest, you might not realize that, oh, that could be something I should get checked out. And so they get diagnosed in later stage. So through that training, we're able to kind of bring that awareness to different communities and also have Native speakers that have had breast cancer to communities and tell them their story to kind of break down that fear of getting screened and getting help early on, and the struggles that happens after you get a diagnosis, or even after you had a mastectomy or a double mastectomy, and what's it like after, and then the fear of it coming back, or when they screened you, there's a chance that you might have to go get radiation or things like that. But being able to hear that from someone that looks like you is a big difference than someone that doesn't look like you. Because that's a big challenge for a lot of minority students in general, right? You go to school, where I grew up in Missouri, it was mostly black and white. There was really no one there at the school that looked like me, and my teachers did. And then trying to be a part of a community is just hard, right? And being able to have community members that look like you or kind of are in the same, you see them as the same as you, makes a big difference than someone from the outside saying, okay, well, you need to go do this, and you don't have to, okay, they don't know me, I don't need that, but okay, now it's different. Now I have someone that's from my tribe saying that this is what they went through, this is what they experienced, and that is one thing through those grants that we were able to do and try to break down those fears of getting help from different people that don't look like you, and it makes a big difference. If you're a minority person, that means more to you than I think people that have grown up where people look more like them.
In a similar-ish vein, what have y'all come across in regards to researching tobacco use and smoking cessation? What have you accomplished? What do you still need to work on?
Oh, that's a big question. Okay, okay. I'll start with the origins of where we came from. So tobacco is a sacred plant to many Native people. And it's used in a variety of ways. Traditionally, it's a gift. It's burned to take your prayers to Creator. It's used medicinally for a variety of things, but not Marlboro. Interestingly, Marlboro is a little different. When you're using traditional tobacco, you're not smoking a pack a day. That's a lot of prayer. And I have had people say to me, I pray a lot. And they're being facetious, but so when you bring quit smoking programs into Native communities, they don't work because quit smoking programs traditionally say tobacco's evil, don't go near this stuff. And when you say that to a Native person, they're like, tobacco's not evil, tobacco is sacred. And so this is, it's a problem with the way we treat addiction when we're talking about tobacco addiction. Native people have smoking rates way higher than any other group to this day, and actually Native women's smoking rates are higher than any other group, including Native men. Native women smoke at really astronomical rates. So we wanted to address this issue, and it actually came from some community members who went to their health center and said, we need a program for us that makes sense for us. And so it was really cool the community wanted this. So we put together a program based on the idea that tobacco is a sacred plant and you should respect it. And so our entire program is focused on that and talking about traditional tobacco and its sacred nature and why you can't abuse it by smoking recreationally. So if you look at what's been done previously, American Indians have the lowest cessation rates of any group, and that's at about 5% of people will remain quit at 6 months. Contrast for non-Native communities, you tend to see, and this is going to sound terrible anyway, but rates like 20-25%. I know that still sounds really bad. It's hard to quit smoking. Anyone who tells you differently is wrong. It is really, really hard to quit smoking. And if any of you know anyone who's trying, just give them support because, man, that substance is hard to get off of. So, we're looking for rates in the 20s. We were at, 5. Our program has rates between 20 and 30% at 6 months, which is a heck of a lot better, and it's on par with programs in other communities, and that we're really proud of. So we've done quite a bit. We're really happy with a lot of what we're doing. We have a project now that is called an implementation grant, which basically means we take what we did in a nice, perfect experimental condition, and we hand it over to communities and say, can you do this? And make it work in your community, and that's what we're working on now. But in terms of where we need to go, vapes. And vapes are not traditional. There's nothing traditional in there. And so they're a totally different animal and actually really bad for your health. I mean, really bad. They're doing worse things. If you look at part of the problem with vapes is one pod, those Juul pods, one of those. Anybody know how many cigarettes that is?
I thought it was like 2,000.
20.
Okay.
Yeah, so close. Yeah. 20, so it's a pack of cigarettes, each pod. And so we talked to young people and they said, well, I only use like 2 pods a day. And I'm like, it's 2 packs of cigarettes a day. You know, a day, yeah. So, I mean, honestly, that's where we need to go, and youth prevention.
And the chewing tobacco.
Yeah, so you know, like the big issue I think with how tobacco, so you got traditional tobacco and commercial tobacco. So traditional tobacco has a very, very high nicotine content, and so inhaling that, has anyone ever smoked a cigar? No. So if you smoke a cigar and you inhale, you're gonna get sick. Has anyone chewed? Besides, I chewed before. So like chewing, if you chew too much, you will get sick because they have higher nicotine content, or you put too big of a dip in, and you'll get sick and you'll get like nausea, and you'll throw up, you feel lightheaded. So that's one thing that's the big difference between traditional tobacco and commercial tobacco. So commercial tobacco is like anything that we make commercially, right? So you go and eat those bag of chips, you eat this donut, anything. It has the manufacturers of processed food have the precise amount of what makes us happy, right? So it has the right amount of salt, has the right amount of everything to make us happy. That's what commercial tobacco did. They have the right amount of nicotine that you can inhale and not get sick. And the way commercial tobacco was introduced, right? The way you get addicted to commercial tobacco is you know somebody, right? So mom, uncle, grandma, grandpa, and so you become addicted to tobacco before you even buy your first pack. Now the issue that we're seeing in the young kids with the pods or the electronic cigarettes is they're buying them before they're even addicted, and now they're becoming more of an expert in using a pod than people that were smoking tobacco. And you know that's kind of a joke, right? So is anyone familiar with Weight Watchers? Right, so Weight Watchers, you portion it out, like so. Combustible cigarettes are the Weight Watchers of nicotine consumption, right? Because now you know, if you look at your packet, see how many you have, but that's the problem with pods. You don't know how many you've had or how big of a drag you're taking. You might even be inhaling 2 cigarettes worth of nicotine at the time. And that's why you're seeing all these bad lung issues happen with the young kids because they're using it more than someone that is older that is a smoker and transitioning out of it. You know, it takes them a while to get that level, but they're more experienced in the drag and inhaling. So that's something I think does need to be researched and why we're going down that route. So I just wanted to throw that in there. The initiation to tobacco is different for combustible and pods, and the reason why traditional tobacco is not the truly addictive substance that people are getting addicted to. So when you go to see if you're ever a part or allowed to be a part of a ceremony and you see little kids smoking traditional tobacco, that's a part of the culture. They're not inhaling that because those little kids will just be throwing up left and right, but they're not inhaling that because you learn really quick that that's something that you don't inhale. So I didn't know, like if anyone smoked a cigar, it's kind of the same way. Like it's got such a high nicotine content that they're not meant to be inhaled.
I know another big issue in Native communities, sometimes on res, sometimes off res, is diabetes and weight loss and obesity. My father's pre-diabetic, you know, it just kind of is a thing, it happens. So I was wondering if you could talk about your research and experience with that as well.
Could you give it to me? Because I'm a diabetic, yeah. And I got donuts, I'm not going to eat them. I admitted that, I'm going to eat them later. One of the things we did several years ago in regards to diabetes was we got a student of ours who had a culinary background to take basically what's called commodity foods. It's the foods you get often on reservations. It comes once a month from the federal government, Department of Ag. It's your canned vegetables, your canned meats. It's kind of the provisions you're given in a lot of rural areas to survive off of for the month. We had this student take commodity foods and develop a cookbook of low salt, low simple sugar recipes. So what could you make with commodity foods, or if you only had $2 or $3 to spend on a meal? And it took a good year or so to work on the recipes, and we tested them. We had community members eat them. We had little workshops where we would do little cooking lessons and things like that. Because when you really look at diabetes in indigenous communities, it wasn't unheard of 100 years ago. It was definitely unheard of pre-reservation life. What happened is, as people got put on reservations, they become reliant on government rations. They became reliant on highly processed foods. And as they went from being mobile peoples who moved around, got exercise every day, and became sedentary, and ate these highly processed foods, we see over time diabetes uptick. And today it's out of control in some Native communities. Is it TNL in Arizona, who's like almost 50%? There's a community in southern Arizona, Tohono O'odham, outside of Tucson. I want to say they're about 50% of the community has diabetes.
I think if you're over 40, it's like 80%.
Over, is it that high? And a lot of it comes from eating highly processed foods and having to survive on very little money. Think about it. If you got $20 to feed a family for a week, what are you going to buy? Ramen noodles, mac and cheese, hot dogs, things like that. And in many Native communities, reservation communities, it's actually cheaper to buy Coke and Pepsi than good drinks. And in some communities, the water's so bad you don't want to drink the water, so you're drinking Coke and Pepsi. And you're starting this at 6, 7 months old. You'll go out to the communities and you'll see little kids walking around with baby bottles full of Pepsi, and they're holding it in their teeth, and they're walking around like a kid does with a baby bottle, but it's Pepsi or Coke or Dr. Pepper on the Navajo reservation because you can't get baby formula. Or if you got to make it, you're worried about using your water, particularly out on the Navajo res, because it's contaminated with radon from the uranium mine. So there's a lot that goes into it, but yeah, diabetes is a problem. How are we addressing it? It depends on the community, but what we're trying to get people to do is not change, change what you eat to a degree, but work with what you have. Because one of the problems, like Chris said with the tobacco, going in and saying, don't smoke cigarettes, all tobacco's bad, one of the problems we see with a lot of the Eat Healthy programs is it's not feasible. Go get these fruits and vegetables and eat them every day. Well, in Wyoming in the middle of winter, you're not getting fresh fruits and vegetables. You know, go to Whole Foods and get some healthy food. There's no Whole Foods. Up until recently, the Navajo reservation, which is the size of West Virginia, had 3 grocery stores for the whole reservation. Cheyenne River in South Dakota, where we work, the size of the state of Connecticut, has 1 grocery store. It's just not feasible to do certain things. So what we try to do is how can we work with what you have to at least try to make it a little healthier? Because again, at the end of the day, you got
I go along the same lines as Sean said earlier too, where we kind of researching federal policy and what foods are delivered and access, it does need to change, because if you can only get processed foods that will sit on the shelf for however many days, and like Sean was saying, there's only 1 grocery store, so you think like to drive like 4 or 5 miles is what, 15 minutes, depending on street lights and stuff. 4 or 5 miles as a crow flies on the reservation could be an hour or 2. The roads aren't the best there either, so it's to get to that grocery store, not everyone can access that grocery store. And those are infrastructure issues that need to be addressed, because where the reservations are reservations because that's where they were placed, not because that's what they wanted, right? So they were placed there for a reason, and I think it is a governmental responsibility to figure out how can we boost those infrastructures and be able to get those foods out to those rural areas. Because even if you go to a rural area around here, they're not going to have the same resources as you go to a city center. Again, if I'm wrong, please correct me, because I'm speaking from a Midwest view, because that's where I recently just moved out here in August. So that's how it is, at least in the Midwest, where if you go out to a rural area, that you have a gas station, that's your grocery store. You don't have a Walmart, you don't have like a Wegmans, I guess is very popular here, or a Giant. you don't have those places in the rural areas. And if you want to go to one of those, you might be driving an hour or two plus, and that's not even on a reservation. That's a nice road to drive on. So your car might even be able to make it where you might not even have a car on a reservation. So those are issues that need to be addressed too, to address this bigger issue of diabetes.
Yeah, we've done a few other things. We developed a weight loss program called NALM. What did it stand for? Native American Weight Loss Movement. We have acronyms for everything. And we were trying to be a more culturally specific program similar to our tobacco program. And so, we've worked with communities to try to create something like that. And it worked, but people wanted some different things. So the next steps there, we found that men joined the program and quit really quickly because they didn't want to be in this group-based, as they put it, touchy-feely program with a bunch of women. So they want a very competitive, focused program, which that's a new one to develop, and it'll be completely just for men, based on who can lose the most weight. And it's all competition. That's what they wanted. And then we're kind of branching off into a separate program, and it was supposed to be okay, well, if the men are going to have something, we're going to have something focused for women, but it turned into the cook in the household program. Because that way, if you intervene on the person who's responsible for cooking, you're actually intervening on the whole family. And so the idea is if we can get the people cooking there, they're mostly women, but not entirely, to cook healthier, then we're actually going to impact not only their health, but the health of their kids and other people in their household. So that's kind of the next step, is to develop those programs. We've done a little bit with the cooking. We did some cooking demonstrations and things using the cookbook that was developed, and to try to teach people these things, how do you do this? And so what we would do is have a cooking demonstration, everyone would try it, and then we'd send people home with bags of groceries so they could make that same dish at home. It was interesting, you show people things like eggplant, and they look at you like, what is that? But, from Jersey, I know it. So,
What advice would you give to students who want to work with ethnicities or cultures other than their own, more specifically on being ethical researchers, being open-minded? Are there any things that you've learned that have made it not necessarily easier, but made it easier to work with people who might have different views than you or live very differently than you, but you can still work with them to reach a common goal?
Question. I'm going to go back to a point I made earlier, and that is get uncomfortable. Learn how to be okay with being uncomfortable. Learn how to be okay with everyone around you speaking a different language, looking different than you, and be humble. Listen to the people around you because they know more than you. That's something we always make sure we do in our research. We do what's called community-based participatory research, which means when we go into the community, it's about what they have to say. We can come in and provide some knowledge, but the community knows way more about their community than you ever will. And so you've got to listen to them. And don't go in and think that you know the right way to do things. Don't go in and think that you know what the strengths and weaknesses are in the community, because you don't. The people in the community know. Talk to them, listen to them, do what they want. And you will inevitably succeed better. But really, you have to get uncomfortable and you have to be okay with it. I don't know how many meetings we sat in where everyone was speaking either Navajo or Apache, and you kept hearing belladonna, and it's like, they're talking about me. That means white person. But you know what they're saying. So learn to live with it. Grow a thick skin.
This is a little bit more practical. Well, not that what you said wasn't practical, but this. I spent, before coming to Lehigh, I was in the Department of Anthropology for about 15 years. And one of the things we always told students to do was don't wait to go do what Chris was talking about. Because we saw it time and time again, students would say, I want to go work in Africa. I want to go work in Alaska. And they would get there and they would have panic attacks, they would have meltdowns, and they would come home after 2 or 3 days and go, I can't do it. I can't be the only person who looks like this. I can't be the only person who speaks this language. And nothing is worse than spending 3 or 4 years of your academic life getting a degree that you can't use. The same thing goes with this. If you think you want to work with other communities, don't make plans, go do it. Don't wait. Because not only do you need to see if you can actually do it, because like Chris said, it can get a little rough sometimes. We've been fortunate, in my opinion, in the time we've been doing this. We've had very few issues, for the most part. We've been fortunate. But at the same time, while you're sitting there debating, you might be missing golden opportunities with the communities you're interested in working with. Because again, things happen. Maybe there's someone you're going to miss crossing paths with who could have been a great ally who can help you with that community. So my thing is, go do it, figure it out right away. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo things that were mentioned earlier, and what they just said too is that you can't, okay, I want to work with this community. I can't just go in there and assume I'm going to work with that community. Go to an event. Go be a part of that community. Go see what they're hosting. Just be there, talk to people. You got to start that way. You can't start in with like, I got this idea, I'm going to come and do X, and I'm just going to go straight to the top, and that's not how it works. You need to be welcome to that community first. And that's a really big part of the community-based participatory research is, Sean and Chris, both, you guys lived on that reservation for a long time, right?
Not a long time, but for a minute.
Yeah, so at the time it was a long time, but when you live longer, then it's like, everything looks like it's a short time, right? So you look back.
Saying something about how old we are?
No, honestly, this is talking about like, like when you go through a PhD program or something, it's a long time. When you look back, it's really just a fraction. Like Sean's saying that you really got to go out and do it, go be a part of the community, see if that's what you want to be a part of. Attend a powwow, attend a cultural event that they're hosting, and see if that's what you want to do. And the more you attend, you're going to start seeing the same people, you start talking, you get more comfortable. That's really like the best way to engage is kind of what they've said before, and be a part of the community by attending their community events.
Yeah, one other piece of advice, never underestimate the power of food. And I mean bringing food places. You'd be amazed at how wonderful it is to just bring cookies. I did a lot of baking when we had no grant money. But also eating the food. If you go to a cultural event, eat what's there. I don't care if you think it's gross. Eat it anyway. Because you know what, it might not be gross, first of all. It might be really delicious. But more importantly, food is how we share. And it's very important, cross-culturally. So try it. Give it a chance. And people will appreciate the fact that you're willing to share in their culture by sharing food.
I would now like to open the floor to any questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, y'all can raise your hand, shout it out. Yes.
I did have some questions. You talked a lot about how you were at a medical school. I was wondering about the intersection, and then you talked about the smoking cessation program. I know a lot of those conversations go, how much do you smoke a day? What do you smoke? And then, okay, how do we stop that? So for your implementation phase with the research, how do you take that practically to the students that are learning medicine and getting those people to the communities to bring this up? It's kind of what
So students in the community. I'm not sure how to answer because it's kind of a couple different answers. So bringing students out into the communities it's challenging. We do not bring students at first because if you bring them out too quickly, bad things happen. So any student who comes out to the community with us has to go through quite a bit of training with us about do's and don'ts. A lot more don'ts than do's, particularly medical students, and even worse, people who already have their medical degree. And I apologize to anybody who is a physician or has a physician in their family, but medical doctors are exceptionally arrogant and have kind of a God complex. Certain specialties are worse than others, but telling a physician, you have to listen to the patient first and be okay with it if they say no to what you're suggesting is really tough.
They don't want to do that, and they all come in saying like, I know what's best for you. That's not always true. So we put them through quite a bit of training before they do it. And honestly, we have told people no. And I have kicked researchers, PhD level researchers and MDs off my team because they are not doing what they're supposed to do. And it's gotten me in some trouble, but I don't care.
Well, in the communities, not to cut you off, but some of the communities we work with, we've worked with them for over a decade now, and they know if somebody with us is screwing up, if they bounce them off the reservation, we're not gonna question it. Because we have that relationship, we have that trust. So if somebody who comes out purporting to work with us or is working with us gets out of line, we might be told, or we might be told, we ask them to leave, and it's like, fair game.
You were that's it.
Oh, thanks. What was the other piece about the smoking cessation?
How would you like a medical professional to start that conversation with the community?
We actually let the community start the conversation usually. So our smoking cessation program was only developed because community members approached us and asked us to create it. And our program is not run by medical doctors, it's run by community members we have trained in counseling techniques. If people want to take prescription medication, obviously we work with their doctors. I mean, we can't just hand them prescription meds. Though we actually provide the medication, we just need a prescription. You know, if they want to take over the counter meds, they can go buy them, whatever. But the actual counseling portion, which is the bigger portion of the program, is done by Native people. And they are not necessarily people who have any sort of formal education. So we don't go find like Native psychologists, geez, we've been looking forever, there's not enough. We train community members to run that program. And so we turn it all over to them. We don't intervene. We just say, here's the program, we'll teach it to you, we'll tell you all the best practices, and you guys make it work in your community.
Any other questions? Yes.
So can you guys talk a little bit about building that trust with the community? Because I've spent some time in Arizona, so I know just how widespread geographically communities are, and you know, it takes a long time.
Yeah, so trust is a challenge because you guys hear of like bad researchers for a lot of different unethical researchers for a lot of different populations. The Diabetes Project for the Havasupai Nation, you guys hear about it? So basically, correct me if I say anything wrong. Let me know. So what happened was there was this researcher from Arizona that was going to study diabetes, and then they decided to look more into like inbreeding within that population and use without consent of the tribe, and so that was a big issue, right? So now, if you wanted to do something that causes a biological sample, like here, like in the Midwest now, or even out here, that will get brought up, and how you break that, like challenging. That is very challenging for researchers when there's an unethical researcher, like same with the Stevie and the Black population, right? So you have this medical mistrust that does occur. And so again, going back to building trust is being a part of that community, showing up to their cultural events, not doing research, right? You're not there to do research, you're there to be a part of what they're doing or learning about whatever event that they're doing. So you have to build the trust, you can't just be the researcher 100% of the time. You have to go and be an outside observer of the community, and then you might get accepted into going to some other parts of that are more like special for the community, like different ceremonies. You might be able to get accepted to go visit that and just make sure you're respecting their cultures. And if you don't know, ask the question. Like, you don't want to offend somebody, the best way not to offend them is ask the question. Like, you're not sure if we're supposed to do X, Y, and Z, ask them. Or, you know, they tell you you can't do X, Y, and Z, don't do X, Y, and Z. Like, that's the biggest part about building that trust, is really becoming as much of that community as you can without wearing your researcher hat or, you know, being like having this extra side thing where like, oh, I need to complete this goal. No, you need to learn about them and be a part of that community. That's, I guess, the best way I could say how to build trust in the community.
I'll add to that too. What's worked for me is when I go somewhere and I introduce myself, I'm not Dr. So-and-so. I'm Sean. The academic thing, is it important? Yeah, in certain circumstances it is. When you're a community worker, no. Just go be yourself. Dress how you would normally dress. Compose yourself and act how you would normally act. So they see you as a human being and not the researcher, not the academic. You know, like they were saying, if you're gonna go to a community event, go to the community event, sit on the ground like everyone else and get dirty. And just be a part of it and put that academic thing to the side. It's not always important. And again, like I said, for me, is it important that people know I have a doctorate sometimes and that I work at Lehigh? Yeah, it is, sometimes. But I don't break my business card out right away and introduce myself that way. If it's important, yeah, you'll learn about it eventually, but other than that, no.
Bring your family. In order for people to see you as people, you gotta know that you're not just your work. You know, our kids come with us all the time. They might get a little annoyed, but you know, they do come with us, and it's important for people to see you as a person, as Sean was saying, and as maybe as a parent, maybe, you know, just bring the people you care about with you, and eat the food.
Our daughter was 8 weeks old, sitting on the back of a horse on the Navajo reservation. Because again, like Chris said, it's family. So guess what? You're 8 weeks old, cowboy up. You're going with mom and dad to the res for a while, and you're
She wouldn't take a bottle, so she couldn't leave me.
Yeah, you know, you're gonna sit in the back of a pickup truck for a little bit with mom and dad, and yeah. So, but you're right. The family thing is important.
Family is so important, and you know, just doing whatever you're asked to do. You know, we've gone out and done things that we don't expect to. You know, we went to one reservation in South Dakota, and we said, you know, is there anything we can help you guys with? And they said, you know, over at the senior center, they really need the bathrooms cleaned. And so we went and did it. And they kind of laughed. They were like, we didn't think you'd do that. Like, but you needed it done, so we went and did it. Same reservation, they signed us up. They thought they were being cute. They signed us up for a cooking contest. It was a traditional Lakota cooking contest to make Lakota soup. And so we got there, because we said, okay, you signed us up, I guess we're doing this. And they brought us out to a field. How are we doing this? And they said, oh, dig a hole, make a fire. So we did. Now, I'm not very good at traditional Lakota soup, so I made minestrone. But people really liked it.
Got second place, got trophy.
But you know, you just do things. Whatever comes up, be open to doing things. And that's part of that getting uncomfortable.
Would anyone else like to ask anything? Yes.
I just had one because you did talk about the shortages on reservations. I know water is a large one, particularly in the western side of the country, especially having access to clean water. How would you take your implementation stage if the community comes first and try to bridge the gap there? Say like for the physician shortage, or say I know we talked about diabetes with insulin and getting the education that the community may need.
All right, so let me rephrase your question. So, like, there's like water shortage and dealing with like physician or lack of physicians. Yeah, so like just in general, like, you know, so from policy side, like they're trying to address getting physicians out to rural areas is to pay for their med school, but they don't stay. Right, so they don't say that happens in all rural areas. And we're having a big problem with that in the United States as we close critical access hospitals, right? So in just in rural areas, it's a huge issue, and I don't think I'm prepared to answer that part of your question. But with the water issue, like that is something that I think, that should be addressed by the federal government too, because in Kansas, we have water. But you go to the tribes, and they know that it's not safe to drink the water because they hear that it causes cancer. Now, why is that? Because they're just right depending on what map you look at, they're right at the tip of the corn belt. And what do we love to use to treat a herbicide we love to use is atrazine. In Europe, they don't use atrazine because they don't know if it causes cancer. That's kind of changing, right? So I think atrazine is starting to be used more in Europe now. But the water treatment is not the same on reservations as it is here. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed. They brought a person out, what is it, Kickapoo or White Cloud, where they have an EPA person to help monitor the water. Kickapoo.
Yeah.
That doesn't do anything, right? A person doesn't help. Infrastructure helps. So that needs to be changed, right? So then if you go out west further, you get into areas where people were relocated to those areas where, we have golf courses in the desert. Should we have those? That water is being used from our reservoirs that are only replenished if nature wants them to be replenished, right? So the West is seeing a drought right now. That a lot of people draw off of is historically low. The Hoover Dam, I don't think is generating any energy at the moment because it's so low. Yeah, so it only gets replenished from nature, and that's goes back to why were people displaced, and we should be able to support them. That goes more to the federal side, I think. So bridging the gap is hard. It goes more on policy and really doing this. You guys get excited about an issue and then seeing what can I learn about that as I go through my education and how can I become an advocate or become a supporter of that community. And that's really what I think to bridge the gap is as students, as community members, to go out and be active and learn about an issue that will spark your interest, because there's so many issues and we can't solve them all right now, but we can try. We can try to work that direction and help support policies to make those changes. Does that kind of answer? All right, because that was a very loaded, yes, which is great. Ask the loaded questions because those are great questions. Do you guys want
to? One thing that I just want to say about things like that is one of the most important things you need to do when you go out into the community is be honest about what you can and cannot do. Because if you overpromise, you look terrible. And it's also kind of just morally wrong. Oh yeah, we're gonna solve your water crisis. No, we're not. I might bring you a bottle, but I'm not gonna solve that. One of the reservations in Kansas that we worked with had a really big problem with lead paint. Because they had a bunch of HUD housing from the 70s that was just caked in lead paint. And of course, by now it's all killing off and it's really sweet, so kids just eat it. So we couldn't solve the problem of lead paint, but we could go up and test every kid on the reservation to get their lead levels. And let me tell you, every single one of them was too high. And that data can then be brought forward to places like the EPA, they can try to then do something about it. So being honest about which part of this you can actually solve is so important. You don't want to be the people who overpromise and don't do it. You also don't want to be the people who come in and act like the savior and say, well, I'm going to repaint this house and you're not going to have lead paint. Okay, but I can't deal with any of the other houses. So now you're on your own. I told you what to do. Don't do that. So that honesty is really important.
I think you said about kind of bridging the gap with smoking and stuff too. So another thing you can do, and one thing that I've been very fortunate to be a part of, is Sean and Chris have dedicated their lives to help addressing issues in the Native population and being able to bridge that gap. So they a part of that, their grants, they take students out. And students that are interested, and some of the students that they go out and are not interested, they don't come back, right? But then some that are, they support them. So as you go on to your career, and this is what I'm going to mimic as I'm new in becoming a faculty member and being a PhD, is that I want to mimic that because that bridges the gap, right? So you keep passing that down, engaging the students that want to be engaged. And you don't know if you're going to like it until you experience it. So like Sean and Chris said, just do it. If you hate it, then you know that's not for you. If you love it, then that's for you. And that's one thing I think helps is having good mentors and learning from a good mentor to yourself be a good mentor when you get to that stage in your career.
Yes.
So we have a question online that says, how can everyday people help these communities? So I'm assuming non-researchers or social workers, just normal other occupations.
Go there and buy things. No, honestly, people talk about supporting different types of businesses, supporting Native-owned businesses, and some of them are online, but some of them are out on the reservation, going places and actually, spending your money there. A lot of reservations have casinos, but most of them are not lucrative, by the way. But there are also other things on the reservations. Prairie Ground Potawatomi Nation, who we work with a lot, has a PGA level golf course. Who knew, So, going to the reservations and supporting Native-owned businesses, I think, is one of the most important things you can do.
And even here in Pennsylvania, one thing we saw was during the pandemic, a lot of Native artisans moved their platforms to Etsy. You're shaking your head, yeah. You can get amazing Native artwork on Etsy anymore. So you don't even have to be in Arizona, New Mexico, Montana. You can go online here in Allentown and connect with Native artists in Wyoming, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and purchase from them and start conversations with them and instant messaging. And they'll bring up issues if you start to become an online, friend of theirs. And all of a sudden they're calling you or texting you or instant messaging you saying, hey, we have this problem. Do you know anyone in Allentown who might be able to help us? So even these little simple things like going online and buying a beaded bracelet from a bead worker up in Minnesota can generate a lot of dialogue and a lot of support within that community.
Yeah, I'll just echo the same thing. Like really, if you're interested, look to see what population has cultural events, attend them. I know it's one thing that a big difference coming out here from the Midwest is that there's a lot of festivals. It seems like there's a cultural event, going beyond just Native focused here, but there seems like a cultural event for a lot of different groups. And if you're interested in that group, go be a part, go to the festival, spend your money if you have it, and that helps the community. That really does. It helps them support themselves and it helps get their name out. But also when you go to certain events, when you talk about Native artists and local artists, make sure that it's actually from an artist and not made somewhere else, or made from overseas or made from totally somewhere else, and that's not really supporting the local person. And that's what I think the big goal is. Support local businesses, make sure it's actually a local business and not just someone that's locally.
Any other questions? All right, let's thank our speakers. I would also like to thank Dr. Leon John Jr. and Dr. Stephanie Gomez, who have helped put this event together as well. And Nicole Rivera, who has been helping me for over a year and has always pushed me to tell my story. Thank you. And I would like to thank all of you who came today. I know that learning about something unfamiliar might be uncomfortable, but I really appreciate you all being here and taking the time out of your day to learn. So thank you.